In 5 simple steps, I'm going to show you exactly how you can get the film look on your digital photos inside of Lightroom, plus maybe a little bit of Photoshop. By the way, today's video is sponsored by Motion Array, but more on them later. All right, so before we get into Lightroom, we need to do one thing first. What you want to do is have a look at the image that you are planning to edit, and then you want to try and find film photos that are looking somewhat similar to the way you want to get your image to look. For example, I found these 4 images just on Google Images by typing in Hong Kong film photography. I then screenshotted these images, took them into Photoshop. I then made a little 2x2 grid of these images, and I've now dumped them inside of Lightroom. It's time to take advantage of the reference and the active tool. Now, if you don't see this tiny little gray toolbar down here, all you want to do is press T on your keyboard, and then the little reference and active symbol should pop up. You then want to click on it. For me, it's already laid out perfectly. I have my active image already over here on the right hand side, which is the one that will get affected if I make any adjustments over here in the develop tab. And then I have my reference image on the left hand side. If things are a little bit mumble jumbled for you, all you've got to do is drag and drop your reference image on the left and make sure that your active image is the one that is selected inside of Lightroom on the film strip down below, and you are good to go. And we can now dive into today's edit. So the first thing we are going to do is crop our image over on the right hand side to be 4x5 so it matches our grid. I'm going to maybe cut off a little bit more of the top and add a little bit more of the bottom of this image, but now I can open up the reference and active tool and we are ready to start. So first things first, let's look at increasing the overall exposure of our image, dropping the contrast a little bit, especially if we're taking any kind of inspiration from this image over here in the top right hand corner of our color palette. We can see that it's not super contrasty whatsoever, so I really don't want dark darks and bright brights, if that makes sense. So once we've done that, we are now going to move into our highlights. We're going to drop these just a little bit, and we are also going to raise our shadows just a touch. So now that we have more or less corrected our exposure and I can see everything going on in our image, let's play around with the white balance. I'm going to increase the temperature slider until most of the cool tones in our shot are starting to become just a little bit warm. I don't want to go crazy here as things just look way too fake and unbelievable, but I also don't want to go not enough where things are still a little bit too cool. So I would almost say that smack bang in the middle of our slider here, things are starting to look pretty nice and pretty warm. And now we can make our way over to the tint slider, which I'm going to check how things look if I move them over to the purple side and over to the green side. If we have a look at our images on the left, you can see that especially in the night images, I would say there's a bit of a green tone. I would say it's definitely not a purple tone whatsoever. So we might just add a little bit of green into our shot, maybe. Okay, I'd say that looks pretty good. And now overall, I'm pretty happy with how the image is looking. Before we wrap up the basic tab, I am going to make my way down to the present sliders right here. We are going to reduce texture and reduce clarity. This sort of helps take off that digital sharpening edge just a little bit, which of course, when you're trying to make your digital photos look a little bit more like they were shot on a film camera, this is pretty important. Now this, more or less, is usually where my Lightroom editing workflow comes to a stop after I apply one of my film presets. Of course, for this video, I'm not going to just apply a preset and be done with it, as that would be showing you absolutely nothing. But if we quickly just scroll through some of my film presets here, you can see that we are getting some very tasty film vibes on our shot on the right. I would have to say, maybe one of the film portrait ones, film 3, film 4. Ooh, film 4 almost gets me 95% of the way there, and I'm loving the way film 4 is looking on my shot. If you do want to be able to save yourself a stack of time when you're trying to take your digital photos and turn them into film photos, then I'd strongly recommend to check out my Filmic Feels Lightroom preset pack, as I use these presets 100% of the time when I'm editing street photos. I love the way they look. But anyway, like I said, we might as well just close the preset tab up here, and we can now make our way into the tone curve. So making sure I'm always referencing the images on the left, we are going to put 3 more dots on our tone curve here. I'm just looking to add a little bit of contrast back into our shot, but then we're gonna make 2 big changes that I wouldn't usually make on any of my normal photo edits. The first change I wanna make is to grab the little black dot right down in here in the bottom left-hand corner and drag this up. Now, usually I'd drag it up to about here and be done with it, but since we are trying to get that film look on our photos, we're gonna go pretty far here. As you can see, especially in the top right-hand corner photo in our reference image, the blacks are pretty faded out. The dark parts of the image are quite faded, and that's a super common look across the board in film photos. So I really want to be taking these blacks to another level and fading them out like crazy. And then I want to do the same thing with the whites, but this time we're going to go the opposite direction and we're just going to drag them down quite significantly. We don't want to go crazy here as things just get way too out of hand, but we definitely want to be dragging them down to a level where they still look natural, but they look a little bit more faded than usual. Now, if we just turn this off and back on, you can see it's an insane change that's just happened to our shot. And I would say the tone curve is probably one of the most powerful tools when it comes to getting your photos to look a certain way and feel a certain way as well. With the tone curve out of the way, let's now move into our color mixer and our color grading workflow. So having a look at our image over here, we can see that the reds might want to be a little bit more red, and maybe the same with our oranges. Maybe not so much with the oranges. The oranges control quite a lot in this shot, but we actually might look at desaturating those in just a moment. I would say the yellows probably need to move over to the orange side just a little bit. The greens in this image, I wouldn't say there's many, but there's definitely more than enough. Let's move those over to the warmer side as well. We really don't have too much aqua or blue going on in our shot either, so we're definitely going to desaturate both of those. And then purple and magenta, also not huge in this image either. However, I'm gonna move the purples over to the blue side just a little bit and the magentas over to the purple side just a touch as well. Okay, now getting into the saturation levels of things, we are going to definitely look at backing off our oranges. We are also going to do the same thing with the yellows, but not too much. The greens can definitely die down a bit as well. Same thing with the aquas, the blues, and I really, really want to make those reds stand out and pop. I don't want to go crazy here and crank the saturation up, but maybe just a slight saturation increase has got this image looking pretty good. And then last but not least, let's dive into the luminance. We could look at backing off the red luminance just a touch. We could look at maybe doing the same with the oranges a little bit, as it really affects these big red banners up here. Let's have a look and see what the yellows are saying, maybe backing these off a touch as well. And then I'm probably gonna leave the rest of the luminance sliders as is, and now we can dive into our color grading workflow. So having a look at all of these images, if we do wanna lean into the really warm kind of feeling and vibe, which is something that I want to do, we should probably be pushing warm tones into every single area in our shot. But let's see what things look like. So let's first start off with our shadows color wheel here and look to push some warm tones into our shadows and see what things look like when I rotate this all the way around. Okay, I would definitely say we should be adding a bit of a warmer look into our shadows. We're going to back this off just a little bit there. We can then come up to our midtones. We're going to see what this looks like. A little bit of blue in there. Almost starts to see us match that image on the top right hand corner, but it's not really a look I'm loving. So maybe just a little bit of blue, but we're going to back off the saturation like crazy. Oh, it's so finicky with these tiny little wheels. We can open up the big ones here. There we go, just a little bit of blue in there, looks pretty good to me. And then our highlights, let's also see what this looks like. Adding a bit of warmth in there is definitely the key, but we could look at reducing the saturation quite a lot. Now, opening up the global color wheel, which is one that I always forget about and a lot of other people always forget about, let's look at giving this image a little bit more warmth. We can check out all of the other colors. Definitely blue works as well, but let's add a little bit of warmth to this shot and then back off the saturation quite a lot there. So just from our color grading tool, we've been able to make this change, which doesn't seem huge on paper, but these tiny little changes, as I always tend to say, stack on top of each other is what makes a great edit. And then we can also have a look at our color mixer tab. So if we turn that off and back on, we've definitely cooled off a lot of those yellows, which is great. I'm going to scroll past, no, we're not going to scroll past detail, but we are going to reduce all of the sharpening in this image, once again, helping to take off that digital look. And then we are going to quickly come down to calibration here and check out just a few little changes to our calibration sliders, because this is also all to do with the colors in our shot. So the first thing I want to do is add a little bit of green into the shadows. We're going to then look at adjusting the red primary a little bit over to the left-hand side. Red saturation, maybe increasing this just a touch. Green primary, probably over to the left-hand side as well. We're making super tiny changes here. That's all I want to be doing. And then blue, probably over to the left-hand side. Saturation on that as well. Maybe a little bit there. Okay, a quick before and after just on that tool. Like I said, small changes, stack up, great edit. Now, just before we dive into the masking workflow, we're gonna make our way up to the effects panel here and start to look at increasing the grain. If we, oh, that's a little bit close. Okay, we can back this off just a little bit. If we zoom in here where we've got a nice representation of the darker parts in our image and the brighter parts in our image as well, we can see that increasing the grain just kind of muddies up things a little bit. I'll show you in just a moment how we are going to really sell the film look on this image, but for now, inside of Lightroom, we can look at increasing the grain, increasing the roughness, and overall increasing the amount of grain in this image as well. If we turn this off and back on, you can slightly see maybe more in the darker parts of our image. We turn this off and back on, things get a little bit more muddy and things just look a little bit tastier. I don't see myself adding too many masks to this shot. However, we are going to be adding just a few staple ones. The first one I want to add is a complete radial gradient over our image. We're going to invert it and then look at dropping our exposure. This just kind of cleans up the edges of our shot quite nicely. Oh, not the crop tool. Okay, our reference tool is gone, but we are going to add another radial gradient down the bottom here, as I find the brightness of this road is incredibly distracting. So just turning that more or less all the way down makes things look so much nicer. And then last but not least, we are going to add another little mask up here in the corner, and we are going to also reduce more of the exposure there. And now a quick before and after, things are looking great. All right, so with the Lightroom workflow out of the way, let's now dive into probably the most important aspect of making our image really feel like it was shot on film. And for this, we're gonna make our way over to Motion Array, and we are gonna search for some film overlays in the graphics section. So let's have a look at film overlays. There we go. Now, as you can see, there are loads of film overlays we can choose from here. This one looks pretty cool. So let's open that in a new tab, open this one in a new tab. This one also looks really nice as well, maybe along with this guy right here. Let's have a look at all of these. This one looks like it's just this overlay, so it might be a little bit intense for our shot. This one here is pretty tasty, I would say. It's not as intense as the last one. This one here, we're getting 14 retro look overlays. And this one here, we are getting this overlay, which might also be a little bit intense for our shot. However, I would say this one will probably work the best. So let's download this and then open up our shot inside of Photoshop. All right, so once you've got your image inside of Photoshop and you've downloaded your film overlay from Motion Array, we can open up our download folder right here and we can drag and drop the effect into Photoshop, and then it's gonna load up. I'm gonna make my way back over here, and then I'm gonna unlock our layer right here and hit Command C. This is gonna copy our image, and then we can make our way over to the Motion Array film overlay. Every overlay you use might require a bit of a different workflow. However, Motion Array always makes sure that you're able to use the assets that you're downloading, and always includes some sort of installation guide to make sure you're getting the most out of your assets. So for this one here, I wanna make my way over to this Your Image Here section right here. I'm gonna double click on the file. We can delete the Delete Me section. And then all I'm gonna do is hit Command V, and then we are gonna make this full size. We're just gonna make sure it fits, hit Enter, and then hit Command S, which is going to save it. And then if we have a look at our effect, you can see that our image is now inside of this effect. Now, what I want to do here is make it a little bit less intense than what it is right now. So to do this, what I'm going to do is make my way back over to this tab here. We're going to move this image all the way to the left-hand side, where by far our effect is less intense. I'm then going to hit the crop tool, make sure I'm at 4:5, which I am. And then what I'm going to do is move my crop all the way over to the left-hand side here. And now all we've got is our image. And now it's time to play around with all things. We can dial back things like the opacity of the texture to make sure it's not as intense. We can come into our leaks right here and we can look at turning certain ones off and certain ones back on. Maybe I like the look of leak 2. If we turn this on but then reduce the opacity, we can also make it not look as intense. We are going with 25% opacity there, so definitely not intense whatsoever. We can now make our way over to the photo filter and we can also just look at cooling things off just a touch. And then finally, I'm going to come down to noise and just reduce things a little bit more. Maybe also reduce the texture too. I think there might be a few little too many specks for my liking, but just reducing the texture overlay makes it stand out a little bit less. And just like that, we've been able to give our photos such a nice stylistic touch that you otherwise wouldn't be able to do without all of these film overlays from Motion Array. If you want to be able to do this super easily, just like I did, just like we did right here, go ahead and check out Motion Array in the first link in the description. They don't only have film overlays, they've got a giant library of creative assets just waiting to be used by you on your next project. So go ahead and level up your photos and your videos if you make them today. Thank you once again, Motion Array, for sponsoring today's video and for having such good film overlays available for us to use. Anyway, guys, that is pretty much gonna wrap up today's video. We've been able to take our photo from this to this inside of Lightroom and Photoshop using a handful of different techniques. And hopefully, now that you've been able to see my workflow from start to finish, you'll be able to do the same on your images too.